welcome to the Resilient Streams of the Wachusett Reservoir presentation. I'm Jennifer Warren Diamond, the Town Administrator. This is our agenda for today. With me is Jenny Moonen from Weston and Sampson and Jocelyn Shaw from Weston and Sampson. Tom Degnan, our DPW Director, is not here with us tonight. But Weston Sampson has been our project partners for this MVP grant.
Thanks so much, Jen. I hope the audio is working up there. I think you guys know we're here because West Boylston received a grant, $105,000. It's for climate resilience work, and it's from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And that program by the state gives communities all over Massachusetts, I'll show you on the next slide, money to do climate resilience work, to reduce heat, to reduce flooding, to make us as communities more resilient with our populations and our infrastructure. The town kindly contributed $35,000 in cash match and plenty of in-kind time, many emails, many workshop support items, many meetings, a lot of social media. The Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, or MVP, is statewide. This map shows all of the communities that have received funds in various forms over many years. And there's two phases of MVP. Sorry. There's a first phase, you go through a planning process. The town did this. It's basically sort of a consensus building workshop where you have various town officials, elected and appointed, town staff, as well as the public, come together and decide what's most important in West Boylston. And flooding was something that was identified as an important climate need to address. We're now in that second phase where the state has decided you're community designated West Boylston, so you're eligible now for this pot of money for the action grants. So that's what the town was able to receive. And we'll talk about what we did. Before we move on, I do feel like you guys probably know these words, but it is good to just make sure we're all kind of clear on some common terms related to flooding, urban heat island, stormwater, and culverts. What did we do? Here's the overview of what we did. So we created an inventory of town-owned culverts, and culverts are the pipes under roads where streams, travel under them just like a bridge. We understood areas susceptible to flooding now and in the future. I'll talk about some of the input we got on that in a few slides. We identified areas as well that are vulnerable to poor water quality and erosion. And then we assessed opportunities to implement nature-based climate resilient solutions. We've incorporated community priorities with a whole public outreach and engagement process. And ultimately, the town has a plan, written plan, that to modernize and strengthen infrastructure, including discussion of costs, benefits, permitting constraints, and a schedule for implementation. And that plan explains other grant funding that the town can go after and goes over all the detailed findings from our study.
And here's a little overview of climate projections for West Boylston. So a little review. Climate is the average condition of weather over a period of decades, and climate change is the change of these weather conditions, weather patterns. And climate change can come in many forms. It could mean extreme precipitation, it could mean drought, it could also mean extreme heat like we've experienced today or this week. And it could also impact coastal towns by sea level rise and storm surge. So for West Boylston, for West Boylston, in 2024, West Boylston receives on average of 45 inches of rain per year. But if you look far ahead into 2050, it's predicted that we will receive up to 54 inches of rain. And also, not just more rain, more intense rain in a shorter period of time, which means impact to infrastructure, roadways, emergency response, just adding a lot of stress to the government services as well. And some of the impacts of inland flooding include impacts to different sectors like governance, natural environment, infrastructure, human, especially identified by resilient mass. Human impacts such as physical injury and premature death was highlighted, as well as economy, because there's going to be commercial business interruptions, secondary hazards like waterway contamination, as well as degraded freshwater ecosystem and other habitats as well. As for impact with extreme heat, 2022 was one of the hottest and driest summers on record for Massachusetts. And today, currently in 2024, we experience 5 days above 90 degree per year. But by looking ahead at 2050, it's predicted that we will experience up to 25 days. So that's a significant increase as well. And this really has impact to vulnerable populations, especially the elderly, the children, people with disability, or the lower income people who do not have access to AC, or outdoor workers as well. Yeah, and so more of impacts from extreme heat. You would see increased demand in state and municipal government services, as well as freshwater ecosystem, marine ecosystem degradation, as well as interruption to transit services, so how people move around, as well as damage to electric transmission, and health impact is a major thing, for sure. Yeah, as well as risk to wildfires. I'll pass it back to Jenny.
All right, so we started our work gathering a lot of information. Some main places we got information from about where is it flooding in West Boylston now and in the future came from existing reports and documentation. As I mentioned before, there was that MVP, Municipal Vulnerability Plan, that had the consensus building workshop attached to it. That plan had a lot of information. There's also a hazard mitigation plan, which is a required document by the federal government. It's for the town to maintain eligibility for certain grants from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Town staff were very kind to provide a lot of input. We even met with fire, conservation, and planning, and got all sorts of details. We have available flood mapping from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and then we had some input from the public on public surveys that were in the fall, as well as the spring, with some input at the library. We then took to the field. We went out and we identified all of the locations in town where there are culverts, and we inventoried those culverts. And we used a protocol. You don't need to read all the details here, but it's a protocol recommended by the state, and it's sort of a big region that uses this data, so it actually is information sharing and gathering that the state likes to see. So we get information on the condition, the measurements, the material, basics, and then input it into this master database. We also take photos, and those all go back to the town. So at the end, the town has a full database of all their culverts, including the condition at the time of this year, and all these details. We went out, it's 134 culverts. You know how much 134 culverts are worth monetarily? Millions and millions of dollars. Each culvert could be $500,000 or more to replace. So when you look at this map, this is a very important community asset to preserve for emergency response, transportation, and to avoid flooding in the future. We found 22 spots that had some things we wanted to look at again. So we took a structural engineer out with us, as well as took a video zoom camera and looked into the culvert. So we have videos inside those culverts, and then we have a structural engineer giving us some preliminary thoughts about, does this need repair? Does this need some maintenance? Is there just some spot stuff to do? We also found a few culverts that do need some maintenance, and Public Works is gonna be working on that. So a lot of good information sharing back. Here's some examples of what the culverts look like. I'm not gonna be able to tell you every location, but it gives you a sense of what the photos look like from the inventory. We did a stream walk of all of Gates Brook, pretty much, from the cemetery all the way to the wetlands, just past Route 12. So we did this because we heard a lot of reports of flooding in this corridor, and also this is a corridor that had been noted for some potential improvements to water quality in the Wachusett Reservoir. The stream walks basically look at where is there erosion, where is there overgrowth, where is there debris buildup that might ultimately be thinking about how do you restore this stream system and sort of have it convey water more effectively to reduce flooding, but also create habitat and spaces for species and connectivity. So we also did a screening of the town, and this is what we call identifying nature-based solutions. So we're not just looking at the stream anymore, and we're not just looking at the infrastructure, but we're thinking about what are practices the town can take to bring nature back to the built environment. So you basically, the intent of nature-based solutions are to, instead of have the rain fall on pavement, run off and go into the storm drains right into the brook, you actually capture it where it falls, put it back into the ground, have it uptake with plants. So some examples of practices that we looked at around town: bioretention basins or rain gardens. So these first two images show examples of what those look like. Basically, this is a system where water goes into it, it goes back into the ground, it goes into plants. People can put them at their own homes. We also included tree box filters. This is a picture right here from the city of Chelsea at a school where there was some nuisance flooding. But basically, it's a tree that just has a lot more space and soil to put water back in the ground or filter it. We considered subsurface infiltration systems. They're not green on their own, but you can connect them to some of the green practices that I mentioned before, but they hold a lot of water, and that's the benefit to them. There's a great way to get a lot of storage, and in some cases you can even have them be infiltration systems, so they put water back into the ground. They're really effective when you want to keep the surface, like a parking lot, still parkable, or a playing field still playable, right? It's just underground, out of sight, out of mind. We considered porous paving. Paving that basically puts water through it or through cracks in it, like if you have bricks or pavers. There's a lot of different applications of porous paving. However, the maintenance needs are quite high. We looked at swales. Swales generally are for moving water along where you want it to be, but you can plant them so that they do have plant uptake, and you can put trees in them. Maintenance isn't too difficult, just a bunch of weeding. You can plant them so maintenance isn't too much work, and you can just weed whack the plants that are in there, so it's not a lot of, like a garden. We, of course, considered culvert improvements, as I mentioned before. And we looked at various strategies for Gates Brook, so stabilizing the slopes, habitat restoration, and creating wetlands and increase flood storage space. So basically putting floodplain back next to the stream where things may have been built. All right. This is an overview of where the nature-based solutions are spatially in town. They were tied very much to recommended problem areas that have flood problems. This is not everything you could do in West Boylston, but this was the start of the biggest projects we could identify that were aligned with flood areas. So to zoom in on the southern part of town, we had, Gates Brook, a whole area, a corridor that could use invasive species management and restoration. There's some also areas of wetland restoration tied to that. That's the orange.
What are the invasive species that are?
Japanese knotweed is one of the invasive species that's dominant in Gates Brook. Japanese knotweed is very challenging. Hand removal doesn't usually do it. It's typically a very aggressive hand removal program, potentially combined with herbicides. We found some places where we could do swales to help convey water more effectively and move the flooding from where it was a problem to where it was controlled. Some bioretention areas, so those are in green, and those are those rain gardens, those areas that are planted. They're aesthetic, but they also have the benefit of, like I said, putting water back in the ground, uptaking water with plants. The nice thing with this is you also can design these to have a subsurface component if you have space to create a lot of flood storage. And we even had a few additional stream restoration areas along Gates Brook. over in some private property. Found some spots for bioretention near Muddy Brook, as well as stream restoration of Muddy Brook. There's a lot of space at the Walmart for bioretention and green practices to be installed in the parking lot. Ignore the labeling. We know that the West Boylston Cinema is no longer there, but the background is default from Google, so apologies for that. And we identified some stream restoration along, I'm going to say this wrong, Goodale Street. And the last two locations were some bioretention sort of in the vicinity of Route 12, excuse me. And some of these practices actually moved to concepting, and we actually, on this one at the plaza, we talked with the property owner, and maybe this isn't a great spot for a bioretention, but there might be some great opportunities at this site for subsurface storage.
We've identified all these locations and different types of nature-based solutions that we could be putting in. How do we prioritize which ones to work on first? So we came up with this metric that basically assigns points, and we can rank them based on how feasible is this and what co-benefit would a project generate. And so some of the considerations that we're looking at is potential flood storage capacity, soil infiltration suitability, and the ease of permitting, permitting level of effort, as well as ease for implementation, considering like land ownership, as well as installation and operation and maintenance afterwards, after it's installed. So the level of effort was put into consideration. Yeah, as well as town preference. And also looking at co-benefits, what other benefits besides flood reduction could this nature-based solutions generate? For example, would it provide biodiversity? Would it provide habitat for native species? Would it reduce urban heat island effect? And yeah, all that. And so we came up with this metric and ultimately ranked the different types of nature-based solutions.
And what this got us to is a top 3 to develop concepts for. And those concepts are intended to be to submit for additional grant funding and continue work. There's also components of this report and work that give the town costs for each culvert and for each of these practices. So costs are a big part of the delivery as well. So we, together with the very extensive matrix, but also, town staff time and input, came up with 3 locations to develop concepts for. So the bioretention basin at Woodland Street, which is a town-owned property, was a priorities for concepting.
How close is that to the Woodland Street Park?
Just beyond it.
Just beyond it, it wouldn't impact the park, right?
Would not impact the Woodland Park. Yep, Woodland Street Park. The second one is a stream overflow area and bioretention basin at Allard Avenue and Worcester Street. And this is actually a light department parcel that they communicated they might be interested in transferring to the town because they're not using it for anything. It's pretty overgrown. It's right next to the stream.
Is that where they were gonna use cemetery? Is that the one that they donated for cemetery?
No, it was just an MLP scrap piece that they had a use for it at one point, but they now no longer have a use and it's totally overgrown, and they said we can do whatever we want here. It's just like a lot, it's a single lot.
Well, we have some photos of it.
Yeah, I was just there, I just couldn't think of it.
And then a bioretention area at Prescott Street and Sterling Street. This is on private property right at the corner of the roads, but a great spot to capture some runoff. So looking first at Woodland Street, we're talking about this area right next to the road, and it has been planted with trees.
Is that the parking lot for Bar from the
Yeah,
This-
the stream comes through that driveway.
It's not a
down
parking lot.
down.
It's
Like a
that's like an
turnaround.
old T that the town used to connect to that neighborhood behind.
And now it's
Oh.
just like a stream
Okay.
randomly runs through there during certain times of the year. Isn't that all right?
So the idea here is to put in a bioretention system, and we're gonna have photos on the next slide so you can kind of relate back to what we talked about before. But I'm gonna get on this side, I think. so I can point better. So the idea is that water can come in off of woodland and get into this sort of linear strip of depressed area. It would have plants, it can have trees. The trees that are there can be moved sort of as part of the design or accommodated, or the design can accommodate around them. And water would come in various locations, and then there's an overflow design component so that it would, if there was a lot of rain, it would be able to overflow back into the drainage system. But it gives a good area of land a place to go when it rains. So just to tie it back to the images, you're talking about something like this. So it's long. The image on the left doesn't have very many plantings. There would likely be more plantings or grasses type approach. And then the image on the right is obviously not from this part of the country, but it gives you a sense of sort of what these systems look like when it rains. So you have plants, but you have water. Okay.
And when the water's not there, do you see the ground or is it always water?
No, there's not always water, so you would see whatever's in the bottom. Sometimes we put stone, sometimes we have plants that like to be wet periodically.
So that would infiltrate after a day or two, or is there?
Should be a day.
Okay.
That's the goal, or less, yeah. 24 hours. This is the parcel that I was talking about, Allard Ave and Worcester Street. So it's very vegetated.
Yeah, it's just like it, they had a structure on it at one point, like a substation or something, but,
Substation.
yeah.
What are the two streets? What streets are those?
Ooh, I believe this is,
I can't even think of that bend right there, where that is.
The Y,
That's
which ones? I apologize. One of these is Worcester and one of them is Allard. I have more slides afterwards. We can zoom in on this one if we want.
It's right past, like, scarce oddities. Don't take the turn, go straight,
and it's on the right?
on the right on Worcester Street, so
Okay.
don't take that turn,
Turn stop
keep
at
going.
Scarce.
Yeah, keep going.
So the idea here would be to do some clear cutting. There's a lot of invasives in there, including
Tree of Heaven or something?
Tree of Heaven, yep. So, which is a fast-growing invasive tree that's not outcompetes native. Sounds good, but once you see them, they're everywhere, and they outcompete native species. So they're really, really bad for areas. They'll eventually kill all of the trees in here. So the idea would be to get clean, out some of those invasives, create a very big sort of basin. At one point we talked about too, could this have some kind of a recreational component or walk or boardwalk in it? Honestly, as part of a final design, you could figure out how to fit some benches or a picnic space or something in here. And then there'd be a place for the stream to overflow to create a little bit more storage for the stream to keep water sort of held back. And just to give you a sense with photos, the stream overflow, this is one that was installed in Arlington, Mass. This is approximately what it would look like. Not perfectly, this was used quite a bit of grass. And then just to get a sense of what more of like a round sort of bioretention system looks like, this is one with a variety of plants in it. It could have trees, you work around the trees, etc.
Can you go back one slide?
Sure, can go back one slide.
I just want to get my picture here. To the right of that, at the elevation, goes up, doesn't it? I can see the.
This goes up.
No,
Oh,
it's-
this.
It's going up. There's a, Peachtree Street hill up, way up there, isn't it? Raised, I mean, I can just imagine water.
So
coming
these
through.
arrows are water flow
Okay,
errors.
yeah,
So this is coming downhill. Water is going down Worcester Street that
Yeah,
way.
Exactly. yeah.
This is going towards Allard. Water is kind of going towards this.
There's no culverts that would lead the water from that area to get it across the street?
Oh, there's probably storm drains in the road. Yeah, so the piping under the roads that conveys water.
In the lower right-hand corner, there's an arrow going up with a grade. Would that be a culvert?
That would be, that's our proposed idea where water would come into
Okay,
this
yeah.
site. So you sort of create a curb cut and then a riprap stone channel, and the water can dissipate energy and flow into this basin area for storage during storm events. And the last site is that planted area at Prescott and Sterling Street, Route 12, And the idea is also a bioretention area here. And similar features, you'd have some curb cuts so water can come in from various places. It would be, I'll show you some images in a second of what this could look like, but you'd have some trees, potentially even, there might need to be a stone check dam. It's on a pretty steep slope to slow water down. And there's some places for the overflows to go back into the drain system so there wouldn't be excessive flooding created by it.
Yeah, because there's a lot of water coming down.
There is.
Prescott
This was
Street.
an area we heard a lot about. So this one might look, because it's very public, maybe it is more planted, like the image on the left. This is what the overflows look like. It's just a little grate with dissipation around it. But the basins can have, I mean, planting is a whole exercise unto itself to decide for these. So with that, we are gonna wrap up and have time for Q&A.
What, all of those projects, they're gonna require maintenance,
Absolutely.
and, are you working that into the long-term budget?
I think Jen's gonna have to answer about the maintenance budget. We do, as part of doing the cost estimates as well as the report, talk about what the maintenance needs need to be. Typically, we're trying to plant with once a year type of maintenance so that the public works can basically go in and weed whack.
So it's not maintenance they don't do already, or no?
It shouldn't be maintenance they do already. Yep. When you add in these underground systems, they do need to be vacuumed out once a year. So you need to use a vac truck to pull sediment out of a 4-bay part where it captures all the sediment.
Is that a contractor thing, or do we
You
use
can
it?
hire a contractor. I don't
We have a
remember.
catch basin truck.
Yeah.
And can you, we have the scoop out one, or do we have a vacuum one?
We used to have a
Scoop.
vacuum one.
You
Yeah.
need a vacuum one. You can hire a contractor
Do we have
to
it?
do that kind of thing.
Just a scoopy.
Just
I think it's a
one.
scoop
The
one.
scoop unfortunately doesn't work for the maintenance.
Yeah, because you have to go in.
Yeah.
Question on the one where, I've seen these in a couple other towns where you have the tree line and you have almost, you can,
This one?
yeah, so this looks easier, but have you had issues with it creating, in this space where we have this random road, it runs down the road?
Right.
It runs down the road, so how would you redirect water to this area? Because it's actually running at a different, I run this all the time, that's why I was like, I watch how it's not naturally gonna go into that
It's
spot.
not. You're gonna have to make sure that you create the space for it to actually get in. And when you say it runs down the road, right, is it coming all to this side?
No, there's water there, but it's coming where that random road is, so if you go down, that's eroded, and that actually goes back into, and it goes all the way down that property. You can
It's in
see
those
where-
folks' backyards.
You can see it flood their backyards and the pieces look out.
Oh, that's what's happening now? It's in them?
If you drive by, you can see part of the road sitting in some of these folks' backyard, because over the years, it's just pushed, and
Yeah.
we had a couple of years ago, it was like a little mudslide down in that section, but I was just, so that's one thing, but how do you redirect?
Do we have to maintain that road? Like, it's not really a
It's
useful
ours.
thing,
We own it, so we
We
can
own
do, they can design,
but does anybody use it? Like,
no.
No.
So we could get rid of the road and make it burned up or something? to
You
put
can
it on.
also put what's called like a trench grate across the road, and they
Yeah.
can be sized in a variety of ways. So it would capture all the water that runs this way.
But it wouldn't take I feel like the major run is the other side
Is
of
this
this
part?
Yeah.
Down
and
below.
How do you redirect something like that?
Sorry. It's a great question. I mean, if it's
Just even if
lower,
we don't need it, we could build it up just so it's higher than it,
Yeah.
than.
we'd
than
have to
the other
do,
spot.
if I,
That's it.
Well, but I mean, like, if you don't need the road, you can do whatever you want to make it
Yeah, but
higher.
that's a slope mark, that's like this, like, so
Yeah.
where you come down Woodland and you go into these people's backyard, that is a substantial.
So
I was
maybe-
really fast down there,
Now
so I
you-
didn't notice it.
but you bring up a really, really good point. Like these are conceptual level
Yeah.
right now. I mean, this is very sketch. We don't have survey, we don't have modeling.
Okay,
But you're right, so you maybe need to change how this is laid out and
Yeah.
intercept at a different place or multiple places. Maybe it ends up needing to be a bigger practice, right? And get closer to folks' houses to really convey the water, and maybe it takes up more of this lot.
So we're wrapping up this kind of phase of the grant funding. We have an application in for the next steps, which would be the actual designs
Yep.
of some of these. And hopefully will be funded through the program. One of the nice things about this particular grant program compared to some of the others is throughout this entire process, when we would have our monthly meetings, the grant administrator from the state is on these calls with us, walking through them, so they know what we're doing and what we're interested in. So hopefully that will happen here, but also the other thing that we need to now work in is now we have an inventory of all of our culverts in town that we didn't previously have.
Yep.
And there's gonna needs to be some focus there because we have some that need some attention. And so these are some things that now need to get worked into our capital planning.
You had mentioned on that list, DPW was gonna do something with some of those?
Well, we've given recommendations for maintenance, and we're gonna be providing all of the structural summary on, I think, Monday, next week. So we'll be working through that with
And
Public
I'm
Works.
just back to, it's something DPW has done before, and I really don't think that they don't have a whole bunch of extra people to do.
So some of them are things that they'll be able to do, so
Okay.
clearing out something, clearing, re-engineering and building new where we're needing to really redesign.
Is that
No,
something-
that's gonna be, for some of the worst ones, that's not gonna be something that's within their wheelhouse.
No, I just don't wanna put onto them something that's not something that they can do and sort of,
The maintenance should be things they can do, because usually it's
Clearing out
typically
debris.
like
yeah.
sticks and debris that pile up in front of the culvert, and then they impede the flow, and so it backs up the system, so it's
Yeah.
basically just creating the conveyance again. There are some culverts that have quite a bit of sediment in them, that might be something a contractor would have to do, but you could do a lot of them at once with a contractor. And then there's places we found small spot repairs, so those, depending on what they are,
The material, right?
yeah.
And it's also nice that we now are having baseline photos, so you might see something and it looks really poor, oh, but it hasn't changed in the past 5 years.
Those photos are actually really great. We have another town that we've done a culvert inventory with recently, and they had the photos from the fall. We had some big rain, 2 months ago, almost washed out 2 culverts. And so they were able to use the photos and see how bad it was, which was really helpful to discuss with the public what had actually happened.
The actual culverts, that, it's great to have the inventory, and I would put it at the top of the list. And then there's areas where we don't have a culvert necessarily, but there is, but we should. I look at Upper Newton Street, the intersection of Goodale and Newton.
Can you say the
That's-
intersection again?
The, Goodale and Newton.
Goodale and
And
Newton.
that has got a curve there, and that's just getting washed out, and you're gonna lose the road. And I've seen it starting to go up there. And that's not a big job, but it really can use some work. And then the other comment I have is this is really focused in on sort of town infrastructure. You know, and when I think of some of the other areas to be explored in terms of climate resilience, it would be looking at the various dams in town. Right up the street here, we've got 3 ponds, each with one dam has been repaired, thankfully, by the beavers. Okay, that's Carol's Pond. And then you got Moore's Pond, which the dam has been pretty much knocked out down by the, I think the DCR might have done it, but it's very vulnerable. And then you've got Twin Pond, which is up from between the 2 of those, and that has a dam on the lower pond. And if that were to let go, I'm not sure how much water is actually in there now, but you could see a tremendous amount of water rushing down through Franklin Street. And I think we actually had one of the culvert at Franklin Street as a particular one to be explored. And then that flows down through the neighborhoods, through the center of town, and then hits underneath the library culvert and runs down, and then has a turn by the Congregational Church, which is, there's basically a garage there that's gonna go tumbling into the culvert, to the creek. You know, it's just, there's a lot more to this problem that we're gonna be faced with, and we just need the direct infrastructure.
Oh, dams are certainly a piece of resilience. This grant program focuses on nature-based solutions. So typically the dam components were not, dam removal is a priority of the program. So maybe future phases do include that. I don't, Jen, if you have other things to say on the dams.
No, just the removal piece, that is, I mean, we were just at the groundbreaking for the Quinnapoxet dam removal earlier this week. And that's gonna be a huge project, but that restoration to allow the streams to restore to streams, rivers to restore to rivers, so that there is the floodplain and you're not just holding back the water, is the trend.
I have one question. So your next step when you have the designs, does that account for what happens when you put that in? Well, if there's a certain amount of water runoff to other residents in that space, I'm just worried.
You absolutely have to look at if you are going to cause any kind of offsite impact. That's part of the modeling and the survey exercise.
Okay.
We cannot build things that are going to affect abutters or people downstream. Like the goal here is flood mitigation with no negative benefits to people.
Is this part of MS4?
It's not part of MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System.
But it's close.
But it's very tied together. Yes, sir. We work with the team as well. The part of our team was the team that works for you guys on MS4. And so
Are they the ones that came in and talked about culverts?
Yep.
Because I remember them coming in, but I didn't remember it being this. I remember it being-
Joyce.
Yep.
Joyce.
No, she talked about MS4 specifically, but we had the culvert people come in and talk to the planning board, like right after it rained for like 4 days.
That was Andy. That was part of this.
That was, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That was Andy. Yep.
Okay.
Andy works on the MS4 stuff and this project.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. He's off on his honeymoon right now, though, so he's not
Okay.
here.
Oh.
There you
That's
go.
Jocelyn's agreed to fill in, so.
What would happen if we got hit with a rainstorm like Leominster got hit with last year?
Flooding of that magnitude takes an epic amount of flood mitigation projects to start to reduce.
Cost them
We
$35
don't
million.
have the topography the way Leominster does that caused that, but there are areas of town that would have flooding, right? So if you think about the FEMA map, I'll go back to that. It's a good indication. These areas in orange, those are areas that are 500-year recurrence interval floodplain, which would be sort of, I mean, that storm was worse, honestly, than a 500-year storm, but those are the types of areas you would start to see flooded.
What did Leominster look like? Did Leominster look like they had some major orange?
You know, I haven't compared, I have not done a post on that, but that's a good question.
We'll just see how,
Yeah.
just a general one, just that sticker shock thing.
The challenge is those flood zones are not reflecting urban infrastructure and drainage, and so some communities decide to do like a whole model of their entire stormwater system so you can see where it will flood. It's just an expensive endeavor, and it's more for knowledge than, I mean, it helps you with solutions, but it's certainly a big cost to do something like that. This seemed like a good first step to right size for West Boylston. You know, culverts were sort of a big priority here for this project. I know this report, you know, our presentation talked a lot about the nature-based solutions, but like the culvert work was about half of this grant, a big part of this.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
First,
I'm counting.
First question is about the planning board policy, or not policy, but the planning board requirements for drainage on sites. Should we change that requirement, or is that sort of changing automatically? Because we sort of apply a standard. I mean, is that standard changing? I don't remember which one is it, but it has to do with like some sort of inventory or something like that of a year that they mimic, and then they see if that's gonna happen or gonna work with the drainage they design.
So the design standards that you have may match the state's guidance that's currently in place, but
Sure,
that state
that's all
guidance
we would-
draft just was released to account for climate
Oh.
change design storms.
Okay.
There's a whole public review process that's undergoing. I think comments were closed the end of March this year.
Okay.
They're saying maybe this fall, maybe next spring, but it will change what communities need to be thinking about.
So, but that's gonna be a published standard, just like the last ones were, and we can just apply
Yeah, because then it's, you know, you're being consistent with state. There are communities that have put very aggressive standards in place. The city of Watertown has put like, I think it's almost 8 inches of storage on, if you're gonna develop or redevelop your site. It's very challenging to meet, but it has helped alleviate a lot of helped with flood reduction. So there are communities that are asking for more. You just have to decide what's right for your community.
Number 2.
If you're gonna-
I put money on that. Alright, this is really good, thank you. Will this presentation, will you make it available?
It is being filmed currently, so it's going to be
I
the,
like
oh, the
attachment,
PowerPoints?
yeah, like I need to,
Oh, sure, yeah. Jenny, do you mind sending me the
Sorry.
PowerPoint?
Yeah, absolutely. We will have that available. This was our last slide, just
Town
bring it
website.
home.
Yeah.
Flood impacts and flood resilience, so.
really good.
We really appreciate you guys coming tonight and asking really, really good questions, which was great, and providing some additional thoughts for us to consider as we wrap up this project in the next week.
I have one more, sorry. The one that's private property owned, we wouldn't do that on that person's
No.
property and then
Nope.
expect them to maintain it.
You would work that out as part of an agreement,
Okay.
because it depends how people want to do it.
So we haven't talked to that property owner
Okay. I just don't
in
want
depth,
that.
but the other site that's just down from there is basically the parking lot of Bamboo Garden.
Okay.
And so Jenny did have a conversation with that property owner about some concepts, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I thought he was gonna be here tonight, actually, about some concepts, potential for that site as well. And so if there was, in the next phases, if there is gonna be a project partner that's a private partner,
Yeah.
they're gonna need to essentially have a little skin in the game, that they're gonna work with, if we're getting the grant and design for them, that they're gonna be
Would
part
the
of it.
grant cover us buying the property?
We're not buying anything.
Well, acquiring it just so that it's not.
So this grant program does cover land acquisition, but not
Right.
like little stuff like this.
Okay.
We're talking about like big parcels for like creation of wetlands. I mean, there's not that many land acquisition projects this grant has funded. They're looking for big, meaningful storage areas that could be like habitat.
This is really just that triangle,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
but I mean, like, if it was a hassle dealing with them,
I don't, well, yeah, I don't know, you haven't talked
I
to them
haven't,
at all, yeah.
no.
okay.
We got a week.
I just didn't know if the grant would help if they said, no, we don't wanna do it, you have to take it by, whatever, take the land use.
I think if they said no, we prioritize these 3 based on that metric. We have other sites that would be less of an obstacle. For example, there's a site at, where the solar field is that we could do some work at. So there's other sites, but we just were picking 3. So it'd probably move
But that
along.
doesn't solve that problem.
Right, but we have other problems, so it'd probably just move along if there was gonna be a high barrier to change
Is
there.
the DCR in the loop now on this?
They're a project partner. We have a final reach out to them. One of the projects I talked about, which was the Gates Brook corridor, sort of stream restoration and invasives management, that's actually on their land.
Yeah.
So, yep,
It's,
they gave us a letter of support for next round,
Yeah.
which is great.
because they will have a lot to say about, you know, what's going into the rest of New York. I live on a stream that runs in. And they're there, you know.
They've been supportive of this work.
Yeah, yeah. And the, what was I gonna say? You mentioned the solar farm, you talking about Temple Street?
Yeah.
You know, that's the old landfill.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If that thing, you know, and I think what, you guys actually, that's how you entered into the town.
Was landfill
It
monitoring.
was- No, you actually capped.
Oh, capping, yep.
landfill for us. That's how you got the first contract from my brother. arranged it. You guys had the largest shrimp. at one
The
of your-
largest what?
The largest shrimp at one of your receptions in
Oh.
Boylston. And I convinced them that we had to work it.
I'm hearing what it takes here.
Margarita's taken on a bigger crime.
Next time.
We just had a conversation about it. But if that broke free, you know, with a massive flooding, Leominster incident, I wouldn't want to see what would be running in the reservoir. I used to go to that dump
Let's
weekly
hope the
basis.
cap was done
It's
correctly.
fresh.
Caps also
And
have,
then you wouldn't know who-
We do have testing,
yeah, you do the environmental monitoring is
yeah.
required, and
Yeah.
the cap design has a whole stormwater component to it, so they always do.
I did have a question about the grant. You said the person was on the call who's responsible for giving out the grants. Do they understand like sort of a continuity?
Yes.
Like and like so they're not gonna sort of stop the grants, all of a sudden you're like in the middle of doing something?
Well, there's always a competition for funding, right? So whatever grant has X number of dollars. But the hope as an applicant is that having worked with us and seeing that we don't want to just leave this as a report on a shelf and that we want to actually go to the next step. The hope is that in their review, because we talk about that in the application, in their review, they'll look favorably upon it for that reason.
Okay, that's good. Oh, and then is every town doing this, so the applicant pool is enormous?
It's a good
It's a-
chunk of Massachusetts, like,
Mhm.
I wanna say they had 150 applications this last round, and we have what?
For individual projects or?
Well, by town, and some towns, some towns do put in more than one,
Okay.
depending on their capacity.
Maybe we would put in 3.
No,
Um,
one. Poor Jen. Jen was a champion of all the social media and getting I mean, there's a lot of outreach that goes into these projects that takes a lot of town staff time, so. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Great job.